Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. This time we're going into a pretty dark chapter of American history.
Oh, yeah.
The story of the Harpe Brothers.
The Harpe Brothers.
Micajah Big Harpe and Wiley Little Harpe. And I think most folks probably already know that these guys are considered America's first serial killers.
Right.
But you know what I think is really fascinating is digging into how they became these symbols of the lawlessness and the violence that kind of defined the American frontier back then.
Absolutely. I mean, and we've got a whole stack of stuff here, right? Historical accounts, folklore. We've even got some pop culture references we can dig into to really try to separate the myth from the reality.
Right. So where do we even begin with these guys? I mean, even their origins are kind of shrouded in mystery, aren't they?
They are. Most accounts place their birth somewhere in the Carolinas.
Okay.
Maybe even Scotland before that.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing that seems to consistently pop up is their family's, really strong loyalty to the British crown during the American Revolution. You can imagine that the tension, the conflict that would have created in communities that were fighting for independence.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a breeding ground for resentment, for sure. And some accounts even claim that their parents were actually targeted.
Yeah.
Maybe even lynched by patriot neighbors.
Some sources do describe their home being attacked.
Wow.
Possibly as retribution for their, loyalist ties.
Oh, wow.
It's tough to verify, of course, but the impact of witnessing something that brutal at a young age, if it's true, could have been a really defining moment for them.
Yeah, you got to wonder how that would shape a young mind. And it's after this supposed attack that they end up finding refuge with the Chickamauga Cherokee tribe.
Right.
This is where things get really interesting for me.
Yeah, this period is crucial. They likely learned essential wilderness survival skills there, right? Hunting, tracking, living off the land, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But more importantly than that, they might have also been exposed to the tribe's methods of warfare, which were often seen as brutal and unforgiving by settlers who didn't really understand the context.
So are we saying that what settlers perceived as savage was actually, for the Cherokee, just a legitimate form of warfare?
I think we have to consider that possibility.
Okay.
The Cherokees were defending their land, their way of life.
Right.
And their tactics, while certainly harsh to outsiders, were a part of their survival strategy in a pretty brutal conflict.
Yeah.
And the Harpies, already potentially traumatized and displaced, they absorbed these tactics, and it's certainly possible that they blurred the lines between what they learned and outright cruelty.
And then when the Revolutionary War breaks out, they end up fighting on the side of the British, and their actions definitely don't paint a picture of mercy.
No, they don't. Some historical accounts actually describe them joining a loyalist rape gang that terrorized local communities.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a stark contrast to the heroic image we often associate with the revolution, right?
Yeah.
It's a reminder that war, regardless of the cause, can bring out the worst in some people.
Absolutely. War creates chaos. It breaks down societal norms.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to see how it could have fueled their descent into violence. The sources even mention them being present at some really pivotal battles, like Kings Mountain Blackstocks fighting alongside Native American allies.
Yeah, and that shows just how deeply enmeshed they were in the conflict. I mean, they weren't just passive observers.
Yeah.
They were active participants in the bloodshed. Makes you wonder how those experiences really shaped them, desensitized them to violence.
It's as if the war, instead of forging heroes, forged something much darker.
Right.
And when the war ends, we see them drifting westward into the untamed territories of Tennessee and Kentucky.
Right into sort of the heart of the frontier.
Yeah.
This is where their reign of terror really begins. They start with robbery, horse theft, but then we see a very chilling pattern emerge in how they deal with their victims' bodies.
They would weigh them down with stones and dump them in rivers.
Right.
It's a grim detail, but it speaks volumes about their attempts to conceal their crimes and their complete disregard for human life.
And what's so unsettling is that their victims seem almost randomly chosen.
Yeah.
Travelers, settlers, even people who had offered them shelter.
Wow.
It's like no one was safe.
It seems like anyone who crossed their path was potential prey. So you have these two figures shaped by violence, roaming the frontier, leaving a trail of bodies behind them.
Yeah.
It's the beginning of a truly dark legend.
And that legend only intensifies when they arrive at a place infamous in its own right, Cave-in Rock.
Okay.
A notorious hideout for river pirates on the Ohio River.
Cave-in Rock, even the name sounds ominous.
Yeah.
This is where they encounter another notorious figure Samuel Mason.
Samuel Mason, ruthless outlaw, leader of river pirates.
Right.
But even he found the Harpe Brothers' cruelty excessive,
Wow.
ultimately driving them out of his gang.
Right, they were too violent even for river pirates.
Yeah, they were too much for Samuel Mason.
That's saying something.
It really does. One particularly disturbing account describes them taking victims to the top of the cliffs at Cave-in Rock and just pushing them off.
Wow.
This wasn't about robbery. It wasn't about revenge. This
Yeah.
was something far more sinister.
So they're kicked out of a pirate gang for being too violent.
Right.
Where did they go from there?
Yeah.
Because their story doesn't end at Cave and Rock, does it?
No, it doesn't. Their spree continues, and it actually gets even more gruesome.
Oh, boy. Last time we left off with the Harpe brothers getting cast out from a den of outlaws.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to imagine things getting even more brutal, but unfortunately their story does take an even darker turn.
Right.
The sources describe a growing list of victims, each more horrifying than the last.
It's not just the number of victims that's so shocking.
Right.
It's the sheer brutality of the killings.
Yeah.
We see a pattern of excessive violence, disembowelment, throats, slashed bodies, bludgeoned with axes.
Yeah.
This goes far beyond what would have been necessary to simply rob or silence someone.
What I find truly disturbing is that it seems like they took a perverse pleasure in inflicting suffering.
Yeah.
And in one account, Big Harpe commits an act that even his brother finds appalling.
You're talking about the incident with his own infant daughter.
Yes.
Several sources actually describe him killing the child simply because her crying was annoying him.
It's
a chilling reminder of the depths of their depravity.
Yeah, it's almost more disturbing that he expresses remorse for this act, but not any of the others.
Right.
Like in his mind, killing his own child was somehow a greater sin than murdering countless innocent strangers.
Right.
It really makes you question the nature of their madness.
It does.
Were they driven by pure bloodlust, or was there something more complex at play?
Well, some historians have suggested that the chaotic environment of the frontier, the constant struggle for survival, played a role in shaping their brutality.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a dog-eat-dog world out there.
Yeah.
And in a sense, they were the apex predators.
I can see how that kind of environment could desensitize someone to violence.
Yeah.
But even considering that their actions still stand out as extreme.
Absolutely.
You know, if we see other outlaws and criminals operating in the same region,
Right.
but none with the same level of just wanton cruelty.
I think that's a good point. Take the story of the Stegall family murders, for example.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just another killing. It's a scene of pure horror.
Absolutely.
Right.
The counts describe Mrs. Stegall actually witnessing the murder of her baby
Oh, wow.
before being killed herself.
Yeah.
It's a testament to their depravity.
Yeah.
It's as if their goal wasn't just to kill, but to traumatize, to leave behind a legacy of fear and suffering.
And the fact that they were offered shelter by the Steggles before turning on them,
Oh, wow.
you know, that makes it even more horrific, a complete betrayal of trust.
Yeah.
This incident, along with countless other atrocities, finally forces local authorities to take decisive action.
So Governor Garrard issues a proclamation $300 bounty on the head of each Harpe brother.
$300.
I mean, that was a huge sum of money back then.
It was.
Really shows you just how desperate they were to bring these men to justice.
And we have to remember, this is a time when law enforcement is scarce on the frontier.
Right.
So this proclamation essentially unleashes a wave of vigilante justice.
Oh, wow.
I mean, settlers are now actively hunting the Harpe brothers down.
And among those leading the hunt is Moses Stegall,
Of course.
driven by a thirst for revenge for the murder of his wife and child.
Absolutely.
You know, it's a classic Wild West showdown, the lawman fueled by personal loss versus these notorious outlaws.
And their final confrontation is almost like something out of a dime novel.
Oh, yeah.
John Leiper, member of the posse, corners Big Harpe and shoots him.
Oh?
And, well, let's just say Moses Stegall got his revenge.
Yeah, the account of Big Harpe's death is gruesome even for that time.
Yeah, it is.
He's shot, subdued, and then beheaded by Stegall.
Oh, wow.
And his head is actually placed on a pike as a warning to other outlaws. It's a brutal end that reflects the brutality of his life.
Right.
But what about little Harpe? He manages to escape the posse.
He does.
Does he just vanish into the wilderness?
He doesn't vanish, but his freedom is short-lived.
Okay.
He eventually rejoins the Mason gang back at Cave-in Rock.
Oh, wow. So he's drawn back into that world of lawlessness.
Yeah, he can't escape it, but his life of crime is nearing its end.
Okay.
There's a raid on the gang. Several members are either captured or killed.
Mm-hmm.
Little Harpe initially evades capture, but he's eventually tracked down and brought to justice.
His capture is almost anticlimactic compared to his brother's dramatic demise.
It really is.
He's arrested, tried, and sentenced to hang.
Another head on a pike, another warning to those who would follow in their bloody footsteps.
Wow, so both brothers meet these violent ends.
Right.
It's a fitting, if grim, conclusion to their reign of terror.
It is.
But what about the women in their lives?
Yeah.
What happened to the wives who were with them throughout this horrific journey?
Well, that's where the story takes a surprising turn.
Okay.
According to historical accounts, the Harpe women actually led surprisingly peaceful lives after their husbands' deaths. They remarried, had families, and died of natural causes.
It's hard to imagine, given the horrors they must have witnessed.
It is a bit of a mystery. Did they simply erase those years from their memories?
Yeah.
Or did they find a way to atone for the sins of their husbands?
Right.
I guess we can only speculate.
It's a good reminder that even in the darkest of stories, there are often untold stories waiting to be explored.
Yeah.
Maybe someday we'll get a glimpse into their perspective.
I think that would be fascinating.
Yeah.
Especially considering that, history is so often told from the perspective of the victors.
Right.
Or in this case, the perspective of those hunting down criminals.
Right.
Hearing the stories of those on the periphery, I think it can often offer a much richer understanding of events.
This deep dive has been a journey, to say the least.
It has.
We've traced the Harpe Brothers' path of destruction, from the battlefields of the Revolution to the lawless frontier. We've explored their motivations, the impact they had, and the lasting fascination that their story holds.
Right.
But there's one aspect we haven't touched on yet, their legacy. How have they been portrayed over time? And what does their story tell us about how we view the darker aspects of American history?
That's an excellent question.
Yeah.
And I think it's a crucial part of understanding the full impact of the Harpe Brothers.
So we've covered their crimes, their violent ends, even the surprising turn their wives' lives took.
Period.
But there's this whole other layer to the Harpe Brothers.
Right.
You mentioned their legacy, how they've become these almost mythical figures in American folklore.
Yeah.
What does that really mean?
Well, it's fascinating how their story, even back then, was so sensationalized in newspapers and pamphlets. They were painted as these larger-than-life monsters, embodiments of all the dangers lurking out there in the untamed frontier.
So from the very start, you have this blend of truth and exaggeration shaping how people saw them.
Exactly. And over time, their tale gets woven into frontier storytelling.
Okay.
Those tall tales told around campfires and passed down through generations.
Right.
Each retelling adds a new layer of horror, a new layer of intrigue.
And nowadays, they even pop up in modern pop culture, too, right?
Yeah.
I mean, movies, TV shows. I even heard there was a Broadway musical about them.
You're right. They've become a touchstone for exploring themes of frontier justice, the dark side of the American dream, even the very nature of evil.
Wow.
Even in fiction, the Harpe Brothers serve as this potent reminder of the violence that often lurked beneath the surface of westward expansion.
It's like their story keeps evolving, adapting to fit different narratives.
Yeah.
And that in itself is pretty telling.
It is. It shows how we as a society continue to grapple with the darker aspects of our own history.
Yeah.
There's both a repulsion and a strange fascination with figures like the Harpe Brothers.
It's like our cultural obsession with true crime, but dating back centuries.
Precisely. And that obsession, I think, speaks to our need to try and understand the extremes of human behavior.
Yeah.
To make sense of the senseless.
Going through all the sources, there was this one detail that really caught my attention. There's a book, The Blue Cloak, that focuses on Sally Rice, Wiley Harpe's wife.
Oh, yeah, that's a fascinating read.
It attempts to shed light on the perspective of the women involved.
Yeah.
Giving us a glimpse into their experiences and their choices amidst all that chaos.
Right.
It makes you wonder what those women went through.
Yeah.
What they witnessed, how they managed to navigate such a brutal world.
It's a powerful reminder that even within the darkest tales, there are untold stories waiting to be explored. Every historical event, no matter how horrific or seemingly straightforward, is ultimately a tapestry of individual experiences.
This deep dive has been a journey, to say the least.
It really has.
We've traced the Harpe Brothers' path of destruction, explored their motivations, considered the lasting impact of their horrific acts.
We've seen how their story continues to fascinate and horrify,
Yeah.
reminding us of the the darkness that can reside within humanity.
But as with any deep dive, the learning doesn't stop here.
That's right.
We've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to discover.
Absolutely.
More primary sources to examine, more perspectives to consider.
Right.
So we leave you with this thought.
Okay.
What will your deep dive into the Harpe Brothers uncover?
Yeah, what other pieces of this complex historical puzzle can you find out there?